The accusation. The conference hall on Station Unity hummed with tension. Commander James Harrison stood at the center of the circular chamber, his gray uniform crisp despite the long journey from Earth. Around him, representatives from 40 different species filled the tiered seats, their forms ranging from crystalline beings that reflected light in rainbow patterns to gaseous entities contained in specialized environmental suits. James had attended hundreds of these Galactic Assembly meetings over his 20 years of service. He had negotiated trade agreements, mediated territorial disputes, and helped forge alliances between species that had been enemies for centuries. But today was different. Today, every eye in the chamber was fixed on him with unmistakable hostility. "Commander Harrison of Earth," the assembly speaker began, her voice translated simultaneously into dozens of languages through neural implants. She was a Threnodai, her blue-scaled skin gleaming under the harsh lights. "You have been summoned to answer for humanity's crimes." James kept his expression neutral, though his heart raced. "What crimes, Speaker Valence?" "Earth has maintained peaceful relations with all member species of the Assembly." A holographic display materialized in the center of the chamber. Images of destruction filled the air. Cities reduced to rubble. Forests turned to ash. Bodies floating in space where orbital stations had once thrived. James felt his stomach turn as he recognized the architectural style. "The Zeltharian homeworld," he whispered. "Indeed," Speaker Valence continued, her voice cold. 17 days ago, the Zeltharian civilization was wiped from existence. 3.7 billion souls extinguished in a coordinated assault. The evidence trail leads directly to human vessels, human weapons, and human military protocols. The chamber erupted in angry chittering, growling, and various forms of outrage from species whose emotional expressions James had learned to recognize over the years. He raised his hands, trying to make himself heard. "That's impossible. Earth's fleet hasn't been anywhere near Zeltharian space. We can provide complete records of every human vessel's location during that time frame." A Karathi delegate, his insectoid features twisted in disgust, clicked forward. "Records can be falsified, human. We have recovered weapon fragments from the attack sites. They bear human manufacturing signatures. We have intercepted communications using Earth military encryption. We have eyewitness accounts from survivors describing ships matching human destroyer configurations." James felt the ground shifting beneath him. This was more than a simple misunderstanding. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to frame humanity for genocide. "I request time to investigate these claims," James said firmly. "Humanity has been part of this assembly for 80 years. We have never shown aggression toward any member species. Why would we suddenly commit such an atrocity?" An ancient being called Elder Morpheus, whose species had been traveling the stars for 10,000 years, floated forward in his containment sphere. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of millennia. "That is precisely what we intend to determine, Commander. However, the evidence is overwhelming. Until humanity can prove its innocence, we have no choice but to enact protective measures." "What kind of measures?" James asked, though he already suspected the answer. Speaker Valence touched a control panel. A new holographic display appeared, showing Earth's solar system surrounded by a grid of red lines. "Effective immediately, humanity is restricted to its home system. All human vessels currently beyond the quarantine boundary have 72 hours to return. Any human ship detected outside this zone after that deadline will be fired upon without warning. All trade agreements with Earth are suspended. All diplomatic exchanges are terminated." The chamber fell silent. James looked at the faces surrounding him. Some showed satisfaction. Others showed genuine regret. But none showed support. "You're making a mistake," James said quietly. "We didn't do this. And whoever did will strike again." "Perhaps," Elder Morpheus replied. "But better to contain one potentially dangerous species than risk another genocide. The vote has been cast, Commander." It was unanimous. James felt those words like a physical blow. Unanimous. Even species that Earth had helped, that humanity had saved from disasters or economic collapse, had voted to cage them like dangerous animals. The journey back to Earth took 9 days. James used every minute to review the evidence that had been shared with him. The more he examined it, the more convinced he became that humanity had been expertly framed. But by whom? And why? His ship, the UNSS Perseverance, approached Earth under the watchful sensors of assembly monitoring stations that had been positioned around the quarantine boundary. The planet below looked peaceful, unaware that the entire species had just been declared guilty of the worst crime imaginable. Admiral Catherine Walsh met him at the landing bay. She was a veteran of 50 years, her dark skin lined with age but her eyes still sharp. "They actually did it," she said without preamble. "The assembly enacted the quarantine 6 hours ago. We've recalled every human vessel from deep space. Some won't make it back in time." James removed his helmet, breathing the recycled air of the space station. "How many?" 14 ships. Mostly civilian transports and science vessels. They're too far out. If they try to return, they'll be destroyed by assembly defense grids. We need to warn them. Tell them to find sanctuary wherever they can. Walsh nodded grimly. Already done. Most are heading to border systems, trying to negotiate asylum with independent colonies. But James, that's not the worst of it. What could be worse than being accused of genocide? The Admiral led him through corridors that suddenly felt like prison walls. They entered a secure briefing room where holographic displays showed intelligence reports streaming in from across human-controlled space. "Our intelligence network has been tracking something," Walsh explained. "For the past 3 years, there have been unusual movements among the Sindarin collective. They've been consolidating power, acquiring military assets, and positioning themselves to fill power vacuums throughout the assembly." James studied the data with growing understanding. The Sindarin were an elder species, technologically advanced and politically influential. They had always been friendly with humanity, supporting Earth's admission to the assembly decades ago. But the pattern Walsh was showing him suggested something different. "They're positioning themselves to take over trade routes that humanity controlled," James observed. "Our merchant fleet was the 3rd largest in the assembly. With us quarantined, someone needs to fill that gap." "It gets better," Walsh said bitterly. "Look at this." She pulled up financial records. 6 months before the Zeltharian attack, the Sindarin made massive investments in weapons manufacturing and security services. They knew this was coming. They framed us. James felt cold rage building in his chest. The Sindarin engineered the genocide of an entire species just to remove us as economic competitors. We can't prove it yet. The evidence they manufactured against us is too perfect. Every piece of it checks out according to standard forensic analysis. They've been planning this for years, maybe decades. James sank into a chair, his mind racing. How many people know about this? Just the senior leadership. We're keeping it quiet because if word gets out, there will be panic. People will want revenge. Some will want to attack the Sindarin directly, which would only confirm the Assembly's worst fears about us. So what do we do? Admiral Walsh's expression hardened. "We do what humans do best, Commander. We survive. We adapt. And we prepare." Over the following months, James witnessed a transformation of human society that he would never have believed possible. The quarantine that was meant to break humanity instead forged it into something stronger. Dr. Elena Vasquez, Earth's leading physicist, stood before the Unified Earth Council with a proposal that seemed impossible. "We've been dependent on assembly jump gate technology for interstellar travel," she explained. "But the assembly's gates are based on Corvian physics from 8,000 years ago. Humanity has always been good at iteration and improvement. Give me 5 years and the resources I need, and I'll give you a jump drive that doesn't require their gates." The council, meeting in an underground facility beneath the ruins of Geneva, approved her project unanimously. In shipyards hidden among the asteroid belt, new vessels took shape. They weren't built for exploration or trade. They were built for survival. Each ship incorporated lessons learned from 80 years of studying alien technology, but with uniquely human innovations. General Marcus Chen coordinated the militarization effort. "We're not building an invasion force," he told his officers. "We're building a deterrent. When the truth comes out, and it will come out, the assembly needs to see that humanity isn't helpless. They need to understand that caging us was a mistake." James found himself appointed to lead a new organization, the Department of Historical Justice. Its mission was simple but daunting: prove humanity's innocence and expose the Sindarin conspiracy. The work was painstaking. Every piece of evidence had to be examined, every military record cross-referenced, every communication analyzed. James assembled a team of the best analysts, investigators, and hackers Earth could provide. It was Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a specialist in xenotechnology, who made the first breakthrough. "Commander, look at this," she said, displaying a molecular analysis of the weapon fragments recovered from the Zeltharian homeworld. The Assembly's analysis identified these as human-manufactured plasma accelerators. And they are. But look at the isotopic signatures in the power cells. James studied the data. These readings don't match any human manufacturing facility. Exactly. Because they weren't made by us. Someone created perfect copies of human weapons but used power cells sourced from Sindarin industrial worlds. They made one microscopic mistake. It was a thread, but threads could unravel entire fabrications. James pulled on it with everything he had. More evidence emerged over the following year. A Sindarin defector, a low-level engineer named Thelvax, made contact through underground channels. He provided schematics showing how the Sindarin had built replica human vessels in secret shipyards. He described meetings where Sindarin leadership had planned the attack on the Zeltharians, knowing that humanity would be blamed. "Why are you doing this?" James asked during an encrypted communication session. Thelvax's reptilian features showed genuine distress. "Because I have a conscience," the Sindarin replied. "My people committed genocide to serve greed. 3.7 billion innocents died for profit margins and trade routes. I cannot let that stand even if it means betraying my own species." James felt a strange kinship with this alien who was risking everything for truth. "When this comes out, your people will hunt you. Then I will die knowing I did the right thing. That is more than most can say." As the evidence accumulated, James began to see the full scope of the Sindarin plot. They had spent decades preparing. They had infiltrated human computer networks to steal military codes. They had collected genetic samples from human colony worlds. They had studied human tactics and strategies until they could perfectly mimic them. The attack on the Zeltharians had been executed with brutal precision. Sindarin ships wearing human signatures had struck without warning. Sindarin weapons manufactured to human specifications had done the killing. Sindarin military units wearing human-style armor had been recorded on surveillance systems during the ground assault. Every detail had been calculated to ensure humanity would be blamed. The Sindarin had even leaked evidence to Assembly Intelligence Services, making sure the case against Earth would be airtight. But they had made mistakes. Small ones. Microscopic ones. The kind of mistakes that only became visible when someone looked closely enough and refused to accept the obvious answer. By the end of the second year of quarantine, James had assembled a case that could prove humanity's innocence. But proof meant nothing if no one would listen. Admiral Walsh understood the problem immediately. The Assembly won't reopen the investigation based on our evidence alone. They'll say we fabricated it. We need someone credible, someone the Assembly trusts to present the case. Who? James asked. Every species voted to quarantine us. We don't have allies anymore. We have one. Walsh brought up an image of Elder Morpheus. He voted for the quarantine, but he also said we should be allowed to prove our innocence. He's old enough and respected enough that the Assembly will listen if he speaks for us. Contacting Elder Morpheus meant breaking the quarantine. It meant risking war. But James had learned something important during his 2 years of investigation. Sometimes the right thing and the safe thing were completely different. A small ship, crewed by volunteers who knew they might not return, slipped past the quarantine boundary using experimental stealth technology. It carried James Harrison and the complete evidence file that would either save humanity or condemn it forever. The Reckoning. The rendezvous point was a forgotten mining station in the Outer Reach, a region of space so far from major trade routes that even the Assembly's surveillance network barely reached it. James Harrison stood in the docking bay of the abandoned facility, watching as Elder Morpheus's containment sphere descended from his personal transport. The ancient being floated toward James, his energy form pulsing with colors that human eyes could barely perceive. When he spoke, his voice resonated directly in James's mind through the neural implant. "You risk much by coming here, Commander Harrison. The Assembly has ships searching for quarantine breakers. If they find you, they will fire without hesitation." James met the Elder's gaze without flinching. "Some risks are worth taking. Especially when an entire species has been condemned for crimes they didn't commit. Show me your evidence." For the next 6 hours, James presented everything his team had discovered. He showed the isotopic analysis of the weapon fragments. He displayed the testimony from Thelvax, the Sindarin defector. He revealed financial records proving the Sindarin had profited enormously from humanity's quarantine. He demonstrated how the Sindarin had methodically positioned themselves to control the trade routes and resources that humanity had once managed. Most damning of all, he showed surveillance footage that Thelvax had smuggled out, actual recordings of Sindarin leadership planning the attack on the Zeltharian homeworld, discussing in explicit detail how they would frame humanity for the genocide. Elder Morpheus absorbed it all in silence. When James finished, the ancient being dimmed his luminescence, a gesture that James had learned indicated deep thought. "This evidence is compelling," Morpheus said finally. "But you understand the magnitude of what you're asking? You want me to tell the assembly that one of our eldest species committed genocide and blamed it on humanity. You want me to admit that we were all fooled, that our justice was corrupted from the beginning. I want the truth to matter, James said quietly. Isn't that what the assembly is supposed to stand for? Justice based on facts, not convenient lies. Morpheus's form pulsed brightly. You speak like someone who still believes in the ideals we claim to uphold. Most species lose that faith after being betrayed as thoroughly as humanity was betrayed. We haven't lost faith in justice, Elder. We've lost faith in the assembly's willingness to pursue it. That's why I'm here. To find out if there's even one voice in that chamber who still cares about truth more than politics. The silence stretched between them. James could feel his heart pounding. Everything depended on this moment. If Elder Morpheus refused to help, humanity would remain quarantined forever, guilty in the eyes of the galaxy for a crime they never committed. I am 10,000 years old, Morpheus said at last. I have witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations. I have seen species reach for greatness and collapse into darkness. Do you know what I have learned in all that time, Commander? No, Elder. That truth is the only foundation worth building upon. Everything else, power, wealth, territory, it all crumbles eventually. But truth endures. The ancient being's light intensified. I will present your evidence to the assembly. I will demand a new investigation. And I will stake my reputation, my species' honor, on the veracity of what you have shown me. James felt relief wash over him like a physical wave. Thank you, Elder. Do not thank me yet. The Sindarin are powerful and influential. They will fight this revelation with everything they have. This will not be a simple matter of presenting evidence and watching justice unfold. This will be a war fought with words and politics and the willingness to expose uncomfortable truths. Humanity has been preparing for war, James said grimly. Not the kind fought with weapons but the kind fought with patience and determination. We're ready. The journey back to Earth felt shorter than the journey out, perhaps because James now carried hope instead of desperation. Admiral Walsh met him at the same landing bay where their conversation had started 2 years earlier. Elder Morpheus agreed? She asked. He did. He's calling for an emergency session of the assembly. Every species will be required to attend. Walsh allowed herself a rare smile. Then we'd better make sure we're ready for what comes next. Over the following weeks, humanity mobilized for the most important battle of its existence. It wouldn't be fought with ships or soldiers, but with evidence and witnesses and the power of truth spoken clearly. Dr. Vasquez completed her impossible project ahead of schedule. The first human-designed jump drive activated successfully, allowing a test ship to travel between star systems without using assembly gates. The implications were staggering. Humanity was no longer dependent on galactic infrastructure for interstellar travel. We're not just proving our innocence, Vasquez told the Unified Earth Council. We're proving that quarantining us didn't break us. It forced us to innovate, to become self-sufficient. When the assembly sees what we've accomplished, they'll understand that humanity is not a species that can be caged. General Chin reported that the new fleet was fully operational. We have 300 vessels equipped with advanced weapons systems and independent jump capability. If the assembly decides to respond to the truth with violence, we can defend ourselves. Our goal isn't war, James reminded him. It's justice. Justice and strength aren't mutually exclusive, Commander. The assembly respects power. Showing them we're not helpless will make them more likely to listen. The day of the emergency assembly session arrived. James stood once again in the conference hall on Station Unity, but this time the atmosphere was different. News of Elder Morpheus's announcement had spread throughout the galaxy. Speculation ran wild about what evidence the ancient being had discovered. The Sindarin delegation sat in their designated section, their reptilian features carefully neutral. Ambassador Krenzoth, leader of the Sindarin collective, showed no sign of concern. James wondered if the Sindarin leader actually believed he would get away with genocide. Elder Morpheus entered the chamber, his containment sphere glowing with unusual intensity. The assembled delegates fell silent immediately. When a being who had lived for 10 millennia demanded attention, even the most arrogant species listened. Members of the assembly, Morpheus began, his mental voice reaching every mind in the chamber simultaneously. 2 years ago, we voted unanimously to quarantine humanity for the crime of genocide against the Zeltharian people. That vote was based on evidence that seemed irrefutable. Today, I present evidence that tells a very different story. The holographic displays activated, showing everything that James had compiled. The weapon analysis. The financial records. the testimony from Thelvax, and finally the surveillance footage of Sindarin leaders planning the attack. The chamber erupted in chaos. Delegates shouted in dozens of languages. Some demanded to see the evidence again. Others called for immediate investigation of the Sindarin. A few accused Elder Morpheus of being deceived by human fabrications. Ambassador Krenzoth rose slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled. This is a desperate fabrication by a species facing extinction. The so-called evidence has obviously been manufactured by human agents. The testimony comes from a single unreliable source who is likely being coerced. I move that this session be dismissed and that humanity face additional sanctions for attempting to deceive the Assembly. The evidence is real, Elder Morpheus stated with absolute certainty. I have verified every piece of it independently. The isotopic analysis cannot be faked. It proves the weapons used against the Zeltharians were manufactured in Sindarin facilities. The financial records are drawn from public databases that the Sindarin themselves maintain. And the surveillance footage has been authenticated by 3 independent forensic teams. Speaker Valence, the Threnodai who had announced humanity's quarantine 2 years earlier, studied the evidence with visible distress. If this is true, if the Sindarin actually committed genocide and framed humanity, then we have perpetrated a terrible injustice. It is worse than injustice, said a new voice. Thelvax, the Sindarin defector, entered the chamber under heavy guard. His presence caused an immediate reaction from the Sindarin delegation. It is a calculated atrocity committed for profit and power. I was there. I helped build the replica human vessels. I know the names of every Sindarin official who participated in the planning and execution of the attack. Krenzotha's careful composure finally cracked. You are a traitor. Your testimony is meaningless. I am a traitor to genocide, Thelvax replied calmly. I will provide the Assembly with complete documentation of the conspiracy. Every meeting, every decision, every order given. The Sindarin leadership committed the worst crime imaginable, and they did it while smiling at humanity and friendship. The session continued for 18 hours. More evidence was presented. More witnesses testified. Forensic experts examined every piece of data and confirmed its authenticity. Slowly, the undeniable truth emerged like dawn breaking over a dark world. The Sindarin had committed genocide. They had murdered 3.7 billion Zeltharians. They had framed humanity with extraordinary precision. And they had done it all for trade routes and economic advantage. When the final vote was called, the result was overwhelming. The Assembly voted to immediately lift humanity's quarantine. They voted to launch a full investigation into the Sindarin Collective's leadership. They voted to compensate Earth for the economic damages of 2 years of isolation. And they voted, by a margin of 38-2, to issue a formal apology to humanity for the injustice they had suffered. James stood on the platform as Speaker Valence approached him. Her blue-scaled face showed genuine remorse. Commander Harrison, on behalf of the Galactic Assembly, I apologize for the terrible wrong done to your species. We failed in our duty to pursue truth. We allowed ourselves to be manipulated. We condemned the innocent and celebrated the guilty. There are no words sufficient to express our regret. James looked at her for a long moment. Part of him wanted to rage, to make her feel the full weight of what humanity had endured. But he remembered what Elder Morpheus had said about truth being the only foundation worth building upon. Speaker Valence, humanity accepts your apology. Not because it erases what happened, but because we choose to believe in the possibility of justice, even when justice comes late. We will rebuild our relationship with the Assembly. But it will be a different relationship, built on mutual respect rather than assumptions about our place in the galactic order. The speaker nodded slowly. That seems fair, Commander. In the Sindarin section, Ambassador Krenzoth and his delegation were being taken into custody. The once proud species faced a reckoning that would reshape their entire civilization. Their leadership would be tried for genocide. Their economy would collapse as trade partners abandoned them. Their influence in the Assembly would be destroyed. James felt no satisfaction watching them led away. The Zeltharians were still dead. 3.7 billion innocent beings would never be brought back. Justice had been served, but it couldn't undo the original crime. The return to Earth was triumphant. The quarantine boundary dissolved. Assembly ships that had been positioned to enforce humanity's cage instead formed an honor guard, escorting the human delegation home. Admiral Walsh met James at the landing bay again, but this time her expression was one of unrestrained joy. You did it, Commander. You actually did it. We did it, James corrected. Every human who refused to accept the lies, who kept working toward the truth, who believed that justice would eventually prevail. They all did this. Celebrations erupted across Earth and its colonies. 2 years of exile had ended. Humanity was free to rejoin the galactic community. But James knew that something fundamental had changed. Dr. Vasquez approached him during the celebrations in Geneva. "Commander, I've been thinking about the jump drives we developed during the quarantine. We don't need the Assembly's infrastructure anymore. We could explore regions of space that they've never reached. We could become pioneers again instead of junior members following in their footsteps." "Are you suggesting we leave the Assembly?" James asked. "I'm suggesting we redefine our relationship with them. We proved we could survive on our own. We proved we could innovate beyond their established technologies. Why should we go back to being the species everyone else underestimates?" James considered this. The old humanity, the one that had existed before the quarantine, would have been grateful just to be accepted back into the Assembly. But humanity had changed during those 2 years of isolation. They had been forced to become self-reliant, innovative, and strong. "You're right," he said finally. "We return to the Assembly but on our terms. As equals, not supplicants." Months later, James stood before the Galactic Assembly one final time, but now he wore a different uniform. He was no longer a commander in the military. He had been elected as Earth's chief ambassador, given authority to negotiate humanity's future relationship with the galaxy. "Members of the Assembly," he began, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who had survived the worst and emerged stronger. "Humanity thanks you for acknowledging your error and lifting the quarantine. We appreciate the formal apology and the offers of compensation. But we have learned important lessons during our exile." He activated a holographic display showing the new human fleet, the independent jump drives, and the technological innovations that had emerged from 2 years of forced self-sufficiency. "We learned that we are more capable than we knew. We learned that adversity makes us stronger rather than breaking us. And we learned that depending on others for our survival and our future was a mistake we will not repeat." The assembled delegates listened with varying expressions of surprise, respect, and concern. "Humanity will remain part of the Assembly," James continued, "but we will do so as true equals. We will share our new technologies, but on terms of mutual benefit, not subordination. We will participate in galactic affairs, but we will not seek approval for our decisions. We will offer friendship to those who earn it and maintain distance from those who do not." Elder Morpheus's light pulsed with what James had learned to recognize as approval. "Well spoken, Ambassador Harrison. The Assembly is stronger when all species stand as equals." James concluded his address with words that would be remembered for generations. "You tried to cage us. You condemned us for crimes we didn't commit. You watched us suffer and called it justice. But in doing so, you gave us the greatest gift possible. You showed us what we're truly capable of when we stand alone. Blood is stronger than lies. Truth is more powerful than deception. And humanity is stronger than you ever imagined." The chamber fell silent. Then, slowly, Elder Morpheus began a gesture of respect that his species reserved for those they considered truly worthy. One by one, other delegates joined in, each expressing approval in their own cultural manner. Humanity had been blamed for genocide. They had been quarantined, isolated, and condemned. They had suffered injustice that would have broken lesser species. But they had survived. They had proven their innocence. They had emerged from the darkness stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. And the galaxy would never underestimate humanity again. The end.